No code, no problem. What if the world didn't need you to be a straight up developer, coder? You don't need to do that stuff. There's amazing platforms that are out there. However, you got to know what's the best platform to use, how to actually build with it. You need some guidance along the way, and you want to get help from people that are doing this successfully. This is super cool because you're about to find out from Mike Williams of BuildLab Digital how this happens, how no code is the new code, and let's jump in to the DiscoPosse podcast. Welcome back to the show. I'm a fan of low-code, no-code solutions because it empowers a lot of people to get up and running and go from idea to product faster. Speaking of idea to product, if you want to find out more great ideas like this and hear about great products like what they're doing with the team at BuildLab Digital, click on the subscribe button. Do that thing. It helps us. Number one, make sure that more people like you see great conversations like this. All right, let's jump in. This is it. This is Mike Williams from BuildLab Digital, and we talk about the process of development, where no-code and low-code come into play, finding efficiencies in automation as you glue together all these solutions, and really the challenges that you don't even know you're facing, or hopefully you do. So you'll find out how Mike and his team are doing some really, really wicked cool stuff. Let's not pre-podcast the podcast. Let's just jump right in. This is Mike Williams from BuildLab Digital and the DiscoPosse podcast.
Hi, this is Mike Williams, founder of BuildLab, and you're listening to the DiscoPosse podcast.
Thing of beauty. No worries. You nailed it on the first try. It is a mouthful. I say it more often than most people, so it's easier for me.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, we'll jump right in. So Mike, thank you very much for joining. I've definitely been excited when I saw the chance that we were going to have to talk because I'm lazy in all of the greatest ways. And by that, I look for every opportunity to do things around systematization and automation. And then when BuildLab shows up in my guest list, I was like, okay, cool. You just made my life easy because I was actually researching this team already and we're going to glue this stuff together. So thanks for jumping on. And if you want, just for folks that are brand new to you, if you want to give a quick intro about yourself and then we'll talk about BuildLab and the challenge that you and the team are solving.
So basically probably 10 years now, kind of been in the tech realm, if you will. I started in consulting at a big firm, Accenture, well-known IT consultant, majored in, finance and information systems. So I was always kind of had a business IT kind of mindset. Went self-employed to start some businesses probably 7 years ago or so with some friends. Again, was always interested in tech. So I always kind of gravitated to that side of things. I really enjoyed just building things, automating things. Obviously, as a small business owner, that's a big one. You don't, have a team of 10 people to do stuff for you. So I actually wasn't a developer for most of my career. I always kind of knew it, and I could work with developers, and I knew a little bit, but only in the last few years, I actually decided to get into code and become actually a full stack developer. So right now with BuildLab, what I'm kind of doing is really just scratching my own itch, working on what I'm interested in for clients, and which is kind of no code, low code, as well as kind of full code automation. And that whole spectrum, I think it's some people focus on one side or the other. I kind of have found the middle ground to be really interesting. So that's what I'm working on now.
And this is the thing about what you've got going on is you cover a broad range of things. So I like that it's like the focus of what you're doing is bringing this automation layer in and pulling together these different platforms. So I think that's the biggest thing is that each platform in and of itself has its own specific business value and functional value and idiosyncrasies. And while everybody says like, oh, it's easy, you can just plug it together with some other API or something. Everybody always says that. But then when it actually comes to putting these different SaaS platforms and products together, it's not an insignificant challenge. And that's why a lot of people they end up with these silos of products and data sets all over the place, right?
Yeah, definitely. Even with the no code tools, which obviously make things a little easier, and we can obviously expand more on that later. But yeah, I mean, building software, if you will, even we'll just call using a no code platform, that's software as well. So just building, application logic, no matter what tool you're building it with. Yeah, it is always a challenge, particularly working with real clients as opposed to, you watch a lot of tutorials online that are really straightforward and it's like building a sample app. But yeah, having worked with real clients, you just stumble across all these things that you never would have thought of. And it is very dynamic. There's always, uh, very infrequently is this problem the exact same as other clients. It's almost always like new problems every day. So yeah, definitely. Yeah, I guess.
It's that neat combination of a lot of snowflakes, but then you find out that snowflakes may be different, but they're actually not terribly different. So the good thing is you can kind of reuse a lot of processes, and you yourself can build familiarity to make it easier to, pull together these very specific business, layer processes that are going to be very snowflake and very individual to the way that team as a workflow or something. Is that true? I say this having not spent as much time in a broad base of doing this, but I would imagine you could get that economy of knowledge scale.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, developing repeatable processes, that's something we really place emphasis on. We don't, even though projects are different, we don't like starting from square one each time. Like we want to start from square 3 or 4 if we can. On the app dev side of things, that's another, in addition to automation, that's like the other main piece. And we're constantly developing both code and UI frameworks there that we can constantly build off of. So, and on the automation side too, that's a little harder to build reusable stuff because it's not custom code. We're using third-party platforms. So that can be kind of limited in terms of like how easy it is to reuse or copy things. But yeah, definitely wherever I cannot repeat work, that's a huge emphasis for me, especially as someone who likes to automate things. The whole point of that is, taking time off the table.
Yeah, if with coming to doing your own thing and coming out of a large shop, right? Accenture, I know a lot of friends. I've worked there, and I've had lots of business, time with them, both as a customer as well as a partner. And it's very interesting because, of course, they have like teams of people that, we often joke that when you're there, you don't feel like you're actually affecting the outcome as much. And so there's opportunities certainly, and you see a lot, and you've got a great group of people to attach to. But, your choice to come out on your own, was it guided by this thought that I really want to be a bit more responsible for the outcome that I can deliver and see the results of?
Yeah, you nailed it. People ask me that question all the time, and I tell them exactly what you just said. Accenture, I don't regret my time there at all. I think it's a great company. The people I worked with, I loved them. I had a job out of school, like a pretty good job. I was excited about that. So, yeah, definitely no regrets there. But yeah, it's very different. I was on huge projects, especially in DC here. Your client might be the Army or the Treasury, right?
That's
So
right.
you're on
There's
these
a couple
massive.
people.
Yeah, so I'm on these 500,000 people projects, and which is cool to say that I worked on an Army project. But like you pointed out, you're a pretty small fish in a big pond, right? And the work I'm doing now, I mean, it really couldn't be more different in terms of the scale. We're a very big fish on smaller projects. In some cases, we are hired by companies that don't really have a tech team, don't really have the budget to hire 10 devs. They want someone who they can ship all their tech stuff to, be it automation or software dev. And, we're kind of like their outsourced tech team, if you will. So definitely have a very big impact on the client's business at the end of the day. So a lot more responsibility, but definitely a lot more pride when you complete a project or you see a client grow and you see these automations running every day, and you know that you had a big part to do with that.
And I'd love to dive into some of the specific sort of customer stories or use cases that you tackle, because you actually do quite a bit. And it's always a tricky thing when people say, like, what exactly do you mean by, creating, doing automation? Like, it can be it could be a robotic process automation. It could be back office, functional automation for data flow, like all sorts of crazy stuff. So if you don't mind, Mike, I'd love to just like hear a couple of, working examples where somebody would bring you in and say, all right, BuildLab is the place I need right now.
Yeah. Yeah. People ask me that a lot, well, like, what kind of stuff can we do or what can we automate? And I'm actually like kind of bad at answering that question because there's so many different, use cases I've seen. But I would say, so I mentioned, again, not to get like too off course, but sometimes we do app development and automation. It's not
Right
like,
on. Yeah,
it
yeah.
sounds like two different things, but in a lot of cases they meld together. But some clients may just be one or the other. On the automation side, definitely, I've seen a lot of different use cases. In some cases we are, let's take e-commerce, a few e-commerce clients. So clients who sell, maybe they have inventory and they sell on Shopify and Wayfair and Amazon, and they want to like sync inventory. They want to have a central database where they can kind of manage inventory, like Airtable is a tool a lot of our clients use. That's, if you're not familiar, it's like a spreadsheet on steroids kind of deal. It's halfway between a spreadsheet and a database. So a lot of it might be centralizing data, connecting all these APIs. Like you kind of mentioned it at the start of the podcast, a lot of this is connecting APIs. That's part of the reason that all these automation and no code tools have blown up, I think, in the last 5 years, is because public APIs have become just a standard, really, for any service. Like, I'm not going to pay for a CRM that is closed off and I don't have an API. I've worked with those services in the past and it's super frustrating. So that's a big thing, is just like stringing these things together. But in terms of the automation itself, again, it's tough to reuse because they do vary a lot, where maybe we are building the same thing kind of for an e-commerce client, but maybe they use eBay instead of Shopify, right? So
That's right.
and those are two completely different APIs and will have different challenges. So even if the process is the same, the technical side of things is a little different. But e-commerce is one of them. Accounting, we have a lot of people that like pulling in sales data into Xero, or maybe they want to automatically send invoices to customers based on usage or something, or like tracking time. They want to bill clients automatically in ways that their service might not have a native integration with. Like, some of them, do have native integrations, but a lot don't, or a lot of times people want to do stuff a little more custom. And then some of them could be more full-blown application backends, where maybe they actually have a custom front-end app that they already have, or maybe we built it, and they want the backend to be a little more no-code, low-code, maybe, where they can shoot data off there and it does a bunch of things and they don't need to bother their dev team potentially. So, and there's probably a lot more that I forgot about, but buildlab.co/work has a few like little examples there.
Yeah, and you bring up a very important point. We really get hung up on, like, well, why wouldn't you just choose a platform that has a fully integrated, connection to all these other different tools. I'm like, well, let's assume for a second that they're not a brand new startup with no infrastructure and or a brand new company that's just, grabbing tools off the shelf that will fit already together. A lot of organizations already have back end, applications. Like you said, even maybe you've even built them for them. And then they go, oh, or we buy a company. And this is one of the most common things. Like people say, like multi-cloud applications are, no one would ever design one. I said, well, no, but I know a lot of people that have them. They didn't build them, they acquired them. Yeah, so they suddenly, buy a company or buy an app that's already existing, and you can't just pick it up and move it. So now being able to code that connection is incredibly important. And most people, like their development team should be focusing on real forward customer facing business value development, not necessarily, all of these bits that maybe are bringing those things together.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Just from my experience, there's a million different cases where the built-in integration just doesn't cut it. Even for the bigger, for one, you might just have a small, more obscure CRM. Maybe you have a special like real estate CRM because you're in real estate, and they don't have $1 billion dev team, and they can't build out QuickBooks and Xero and sales, or Salesforce and Slack and all these integrations. Even some of the big guys, like we use HubSpot. We're a HubSpot partner. And not to like pump them or anything. There's a lot of great CRMs, but HubSpot is very full feature. They're a huge company, right? They have a lot of native integrations, and I definitely am not opposed to utilizing those where possible. Sometimes I'll advise clients, hey, I think you should just use this all in one, even though it's technically like taking billing away from us. Ultimately, I just want to help them out. But I'm definitely not opposed to that. But even with those big guys, there are some things that they won't have, or it's not as customizable. That's kind of the trade-off between using something that someone else built. If you just need to do one little thing different, that might be like an issue. So yeah, that's definitely a part of it. And for people who, like you mentioned, who might buy a business or have their own app, that's another piece of the puzzle that's kind of deals with the automation and software dev. One thing we uniquely do is we actually create custom modules for apps. So I'll like explain that a little bit. So there's Zapier is probably the most popular automation platform. If you're familiar with Zapier, we use Integromat as well. And the way they work, they have all these modules, right? Like Slack, like I can string HubSpot to Slack to Xero to whatever. I can link everything up. And they do that by wrapping the APIs, and usually the vendors themselves build that. And that's why these platforms are so popular. Like Zapier is doing incredible right now. And it's because you can just have 2,000 integrations right out of the box, whereas the CRM you're using probably doesn't have 2,000 integrations. I mean, maybe it has some. But what we do actually, we do come across people where Zapier doesn't have an integration or Integromat doesn't. And it's either for an app that they use a lot, like heavily, like I think like IMDb was or this movie database for one of our clients. But we can actually build a module to like wrap that API. So their users can build these automations together, and they can just throw in that app. So, or if you have a custom SaaS product, say, and you don't have the resources to build in integrations yourself, say your users are asking for a Slack integration or a Salesforce, it's like you can spend the time to build those out custom, and or those teams, Slack and HubSpot and whatever, they've already built these integrations on these automation platforms. So you can just build your own little app that interfaces with your API, and your users can string that together however they want. So you can spend probably like a fraction of the money and have 2,000 integrations essentially, just right out of the box without having to spend any dev time on it. So that's an interesting like use case.
Yeah, it's not necessarily they say I need to integrate my data with, Xero or whatever it's going to be. And you say, well, no, what you need to do is you need to integrate it with Zapier as an example. And because it already has Xero. So, and then from there, you could potentially integrate with other things. So it's neat too, because as a as a business owner, as an app owner, as a, like, I'm thinking about purely business flow. I've, data, activity, whatever it's going to be is here. I need to get it over here. And all that I see is the set of tools that I'm aware of, right? It's the things we know, and versus you can come in and say, well, if this is where you need it in the end, and this is where you have it at the beginning, here's actually an optimal path because there's other opportunities for, easier low code integration and such. So definitely a distinct advantage in hiring somebody who that's their specialty more so than, you know, looking at the very narrow view of I have this app and this data and I want them to talk.
Yeah. Yeah, and we do a lot of work with companies that already have dev teams. Like they don't technically need, I mean, they could put one of their devs on this stuff, but ultimately we've just found our way. We kind of specialize in this, what's kind of a smaller pool right now. I mean, it's growing, but particularly in Integromat, we do a ton there. We're one of their gold partners, and they're like a smaller but upcoming Zapier competitor. And I mean, there are only a handful of people who do that stuff. So we have clients who come to us, and just because we're, one of few companies doing it, it's like, they could have their devs spend a week trying to learn it. And I think if you're a dev, it's very intuitive. Like the concepts are the same, even though you're not writing custom code.
Right.
But still, it just makes more sense for a lot of companies to just hire a specialist, right?
Well, and it becomes this neat thing of, I've had a few different folks on, and like prior to hearing about their work, I had never heard of this company called Ontraport. And all of a sudden, in the string of like a couple of months, I had 3 specific people they were Ontraport specialists. And it was really neat that rather than a HubSpot, like, and people do that with HubSpot or with MailChimp or with a Salesforce, whatever it's going to be, like they said their niche choice as a business owner was, look, I'm really fantastic at doing just this thing. And then from there, they found that they spanned out in their consulting practices and started to bring on other products. But that, like you said, so you've got this platform which people may not know right out of the gate, but you're like, look, it can do this thing, and I can show you 50 other cases where we've done it, and we're going to help you do it together. It's comforting, right? Because then people now know that it's, if anything, a company that's not like, well, I don't want to pick on Zapier, but like, we're like, sometimes you get the company that's trying to be everything, and then you suddenly realize that there's maybe not as much attention as you would hope you could get, which is why I would go in and say, Mike, I need help because I want someone who's going to know about this app in a year and it not be just me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned like trying to be everything. That's another, that just kind of reminds me, it's just as a little tangent. That's another thing with, I think why automation is getting popular. Because like, it's a lot more common now for people to have these segmented services, right? Like you probably is there an all-in-one solution that has CRM, chat, database, email? Like, yeah, sure. But most people use Slack for chat because it's really good for chat. They use their CRM for CRM because it's really good for CRM. They use G Suite for email because it's really good for, right? Like, and I think I saw some stat the other day, the average company has like 20 different SaaS subscriptions or something like that.
Yeah.
Which sounds like that's kind of coming from the old days. Like I haven't been around that long, but we were at Accenture, we were putting in some of these ERP solutions these are obviously still popular and around, but those ERPs back in the day was like every single business function is going to be in this one app,
That's right.
and like, it sounds like so old fashioned now. Cause it's not common at all. It's not uncommon at all to like use these a la carte services and time altogether, because it might be, an ERP might cost you a fortune, and, Slack's $6 per user a month. I always compare it, this might be stupid, but to like food trucks, right? Like, so you can go to a restaurant that has burgers and steaks and this and that. But these food trucks are people who are basically like, they generally specialize in something, right? It's like, that's a burger truck. And it's kind of like they just do burgers really well, right? So like if I want a burger, I can just go to that burger truck. And I know they probably don't have a mediocre burger, right? They probably wouldn't do what they do if that was the case. So yeah, there's a lot of these little SaaS products that do one thing really well, and people just want to tie them together.
And it makes sense. And in the as a consumer, you go to the place instead of having to go into the restaurant where you're trapped inside the walls. You generally go there and there's more than one food truck. They're parked next to each other. So you can go to the fry truck for the best fries, the burger truck for the best burger, and you get the best meal. Like you get exactly what you wanted from the best of each. And that's why it's actually a fantastic analogy for the value of these like multiple SaaS platforms. It is still counterintuitive to what we've been sort of beaten into for decades now of like, you should bring it all into, one throat to choke, as they say, or whatever it's going to be,
Mhm.
and it's tough, because I mean, look, I get my credit card bill and like I get my notifications on my phone and it's like about every 20 hours, something pings saying I just paid for something. It's a nominal tiny fee, but if I if I don't if I'm not careful and I don't look at the total bill for the month, $4, $8, $20, they do add up. But what's it mean for me? I've got a learning management system, which is not a common one. They're fantastic, and I've used the platform, and so I would do just what you're talking about. Like I want somebody to make that work because I've already made that work for that function. I don't want to then build another, move it to, a Kajabi or another one. Great, again, great platform, great partners, but I'm already using this one and I've got workflows and I've got students, I've got people using this stuff. So, uh, and Mike, I want to talk about the no code, low code thing because this is something people really get. It's a misunderstood phrase. So let's talk about that and maybe sort of unpack some of the myths of low code and no code and what it really means.
Sure. Um, yeah. Did you just want me to go into it, or did you
Yeah, no,
have
just
a
just
specific
just
question?
dive in. Yeah, if we dive in on your what it is for you and especially like what are the advantages to doing that type of development.
Yeah, it's kind of it's a little bit of a loaded term. People kind of argue on Twitter about what no code actually is. I, just to use up, no code is kind of the broad term now because the popularity has increased so much that it is kind of its space of its own now. But me personally, when I say no code, I'm referring to a really big umbrella of services that includes low code. Like I'll usually lump them in together as well. But the gist is um, that it's basically just ways to build software or applications with code abstracted. There's obviously code behind the scenes, but where you have to do a minimal amount of code, you might just put in certain parameters into a module, and that sends a request to HubSpot's API, and you don't have to write the HubSpot API wrapper or anything like that. Um, it's become popular the last 5 years. It's not new though. I mean, some of the no code critics will say, "Oh, this has been around forever." Like Dreamweaver was a no code website builder.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Squarespace even has been around for a while. That it's funny. I think they're kind of like old school almost now, but um, you could call Excel a low code app. So it can mean like whatever you want it to mean. I honestly, I don't get too caught up in. Some people just argue too much about just the like
Okay.
semantics of words, but that's just kind of the broad stroke is just and it can be back end or front end. I mentioned Zapier and Tegromat. That's more back end. That's running application logic. There's not a UI, but there's also front end tools like I mentioned. Squarespace was probably one of the first ones. I mean, technically, that's like a no code, low code tool. You can build a site without having to write a bunch of HTML. Right? You have a template out of the box. Webflow is a very popular service now. I think Webflow has really nailed the kind of mix of power and ease of use. So they're not surprisingly doing really well now. So just no code, when most people say it, they're just referring to those kind of tools.
Yeah. Well, and it becomes a thing that again, I don't want to be researching the toolkit. I want to go to somebody who knows this ecosystem, that I can ask you the question and you can rattle off every one that's on the top of your mind. And it isn't it's a big advantage for folks to like invite somebody in who that's what they do. And this is why I love the role that you and the Build Lab team are taking. It's like, let us do this part, do code so we can offload. Like I said, maybe they got developers, that's fine. But maybe you could do this because it's all you're going to focus on, and you can get it done while they're working on other things that are much higher business value, like second order value to that company, instead of them having to go and chase and learn a new platform.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, I'm biased, but I think we're worth the money, and you should hire instead of try to do everything yourself. Which it's a little ironic because the no code tools are supposed to be like you can build right without a developer. But obviously, again, in the real world, it makes sense to hire experts to do things like, yes, these tools are drag and drop. Anyone can technically use them. But there's a difference between being, proficient and expert, like as with anything, not no code, but pretty much any field, right? Once you've been around for a while, and no code's pretty new, so I say a while, but that's like 5 years is kind of ancient.
That's yeah, relative to period of time, right?
Yeah, I'm talking like I'm an old expert, but yeah, definitely, it's kind of an 80-20 thing where, yeah, you can be like quick to learn that 80, but that last 20% is where, a ton of value could be. We've used these tools so many times. Not only can we just do things quicker than you probably could. I've had some clients come to me where they were kind of like iffy about budget, but they were also like, I've spent 2 weeks trying to figure this one little simple automation out. I'm like, which is it? Like, do you want to save money or do you want to save 2 weeks? But yeah, definitely we've been around the block a bit, and we know not just how to build these things, but it's how to architect them well. And I think that goes for all of software. It's so easy to find a mediocre dev who can just build you a product. Someone who can architect it in like a lean way that minimizes tech debt, that's going to not go down every month. That's a whole nother story. And that's the reason why there's $200 an hour engineers and there's $20 an hour engineers. Yeah. And a lot of the 200 guys are probably worth it, right? Because the architecture is a big piece of it. I think that's where we ultimately provide the most value on the no code, low code side, even though, yeah, you can build all this stuff. We not only knowing, we also advise on just different services too, because we've worked with everything. So some people might need a CRM. That's another piece of things. But yeah, ultimately you're leveraging, years of experience, and we can distill it down into a couple hours.
It is a big win. And I use the stuff all the time, and I've learned, because I used to be the sort of the crotchety, admin developer type who'd say like, look, I'm not going to pay somebody to do this because I should be able to do this on my own. And it wasn't incorrect. I have the technical and intellectual capability to do it, but I don't have the time. And unfortunately, we get stuck on the thing of like, haven't we already got a team of developers? Like, well, no. End result is now here I am. I'm older Eric, who I had to build a simple app, and I was like, I'm comfortable with Ruby on Rails. I'm comfortable doing a bunch of stuff, but I didn't want to have the hardening process of authentication be my problem. Mm-hmm. So I found a consultant who specializes in that. And in this case, I had two consultants, and one who's like the $20 an hour person. God bless them. They're doing great work for general stuff. But it was going to be like a 15-hour project. And I would probably be, getting something that not quite as tight and as lean and as well factored as it should be. So I hired a guru, and it was like $175 an hour. And the end result is the guy sends me back a thing on over the weekend. He works on it, and he sends me an email on Monday, goes, here it is. It actually ended up taking me about half an hour because I've already done all of this stuff before. So I just kind of pulled together a couple of examples to let me know if this works. And, so end result, I looked at it, super tight code. I knew exactly what I was getting. He documented it. So he had processes that he had hardened himself over time. And I got that. In the end, probably I tipped him more than I would have, than I paid for the contract, because it was worth that much to me versus, 20 hours with this other developer. And I'd have gotten code that I probably could have written if I spent 80 hours. But now when I hand it to the next developer, they got to do refactoring and they got to do all sorts of stuff. It is a weird, development's a weird thing because there's right is such a weird subjective thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I've that same experience. I've definitely had that a few times. I've hired dozens of, freelancers throughout the years. And, yeah, I'm obviously biased, but I think hourly rate is only it can be only a small part of the equation, right? Like if you hire a $30 guy to do 10 hours of work and you have to tear it all down, it's like you could have hired a $300 an hour guy to do it in an hour, right?
Yeah.
That's a very simple example, obviously. Now there are cases for, more, because I've hired both. I've hired high dollar, more consultancy roles. I've hired lower, like when we just really just needed a lot of stuff shipped. So I'm not knocking lower hourly, like by any means. I think there's a reason that both exist. And I'll even advise prospects sometimes. I try to be real straight up on sales calls. Sometimes I'll tell them, I'll be like, I think you should actually just hire someone cheaper. Like you guys have a really easy workflow. I don't think we're going to provide much more value than like the mediocre or the average guy is.
Yep.
Ultimately, like I'm not trying to, be average in the space. I want to be towards that higher end. I mean, obviously, like everyone probably says that, but that's again, I didn't start this to like start a business. I just got into these tools, and ultimately, kind of the business came after. So this is something like that I and my team like are really putting. We're really interested, and we're not just doing it to make a buck. And so I don't want to try to compete with the lower end side of things, because that's going to be a lose-lose for everyone.
Yeah, well, and this is the other thing too, and it's always tough too when even the phrases we have to use, we talk about cheap, expensive, mediocre, average. Like I I know I hate that people will get attached to the semantics of it, but what we're talking about is sort of a range in whatever. It's a range. It is effectively a spectrum of what you're getting. And when I hire a $300 an hour person, they're not 10 times better than the $30 an hour person, but they may have far more experience, so they won't do certain things that the $30 an hour like it is junior, senior, like people get hung up on those names. And so I just wanted to say that as for anybody that's kind of gnashing their teeth when you and I toss around words like junior and mediocre, like, no, that's not what we mean. I mean, I need to solve one goddamn problem. And who am I going to hire to do it? Somebody I know that they could make their money elsewhere. They don't want to do my small project. So they're going to do it well, fast. And in the end, for me, it will be less expensive because, and even better, you won me over when you said this, Mike. I probably am not the right fit for this particular situation, but here's a place you can go. Right? It's the best thing you can do for somebody is to tell them, yeah, this is probably not I don't want to waste your time and your money. You could get this done with maybe this group of people or with this platform. Like it's a fantastic customer experience when someone says, here's actually a better thing for you.
Yeah, I again have no problem telling people that. Like I said, the no code, again, I just kind of happened into this, but particularly with Integromat, we get a lot of work that like I can't even take really. Unfortunately, I'm trying to scale up my team now. That's my number one focus. But yeah, so I can't take all the work that comes anyway. So I don't want to take a project that think I'm going to do a bad job on. And yeah, I'm definitely not picking sides here, saying like, oh, you should always hire a $300 developer. And I definitely don't want to give off that impression.
No, for sure.
That's part of the whole consulting we do with just low code and no code and code is just telling like what's the right tool for this job, right? And the same goes for, what's the right hire? Like, should we hire a consultant? Should we hire a lower level employee? Should we hire a part-time? Should we use an internal staff on it? There's a million different things. And again, I'm not just trying to market myself as an expert just because I'd rather make, more money per hour or anything like that. It's just about, I just realized that there's a big difference there, both from hiring and from seeing clients who, a lot of them do come to us who have like an 80% Integromat thing built out, but they're like, the last 20 is always the hardest, right? And that goes for all software, I think. And they're just like, yeah, they just couldn't cut it. Like they couldn't figure out this last part, or they couldn't. And that's where like a lot of the value is really, because then it doesn't matter what the hourly rate is. Like sometimes, or it might not be another developer, but it might be the business owner themselves, where they're like, I got this far, but I just can't do the rest of it. And it's like, they could spend a month and they might not get it. That's the thing with software, is there are some really tricky problems that it's not about grunt work. Like that's the reason these big tech companies paid 200 grand for kids, to come work for them. Like there are cases where throwing more people at it, what might necessarily not solve it. It's more of just like a mental architectural issue. So I kind of just saw that from real life clients, that there was a need for, someone who's like focuses more on the maybe more intricate, like architectural automation side of things, as opposed to just building. We need all these things built out, and it's just, going to be this many hours.
And it becomes a thing of think of the very simple analogy I would give somebody is, you want to paint your ceiling and you got a 40-foot ceiling because you got a beautiful house. All right, what do? Are you going to hire a painter that doesn't have a ladder? Are you going to hire a painter that has a bunch of ladders they're going to stick together? Or are you going to hire a scaffolding guy? Now, the scaffolding guy is going to nail this down. You're going to say, man, but the scaffolding guy is costing me $1,000. Like, well, guess what? How much of the holes in the walls from the ladders tipping over from the other fight? Like, and do you yourself want to go out to Home Depot and buy a ladder? And like, it's like the scaffolding is the 80%. It's this thing that it looks sometimes even easy, but it's a big waster of time, and you get it all done. And then when it comes to the 20% that's really super business critical, well, you've spent all this time putting the scaffolding up. Hire somebody that can do the scaffolding so they can get right to the problem and get it out of the way. That's my humble opinion from years of doing this too. Is like, yeah, that's why I love hiring specialists. I even just to get it started. If anything, it reminds me that I'm at the start line. Like it's like a relay race. Be the second leg. Don't be the one out of the start gate. I've do this for my advertising. I have a Shopify store for my coffee business. I had a choice. Do I build it from ground up and learn the intricacies of Shopify, or do I take a packaged bundle and then customize it? It cost me a little bit more, and the end result was I was live in 24 hours. And I've tried it before, and I spent like a week and a half in Shopify going, this is neat, but I got to glue. I literally got it. They handed me the admin email, and I was live. And I was like, okay. So literally at that point, it was just up to me how I wanted to tune it for the customer, not how I wanted to tune it for the admin experience.
Yeah. I don't have much to add to that, really. I think you said it.
Now, so let's talk about your journey to become a developer. I'm curious, whenever someone comes to it later in life, I'm always interested, was it something that you were interested early but never put the focus and attention to, or like how long because a developer's it's a mindset as much as it is a practice, I find.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I always knew that I was always interested in code. Like the few classes I took in high school and college, I like was definitely interested in, but I never dove in because I knew, becoming a developer, that's like a whole time commitment thing. And coming from it from more of a business and tech standpoint, I always knew, like you talked in this podcast a lot about, delegating, right? Like anyone who grows a business ultimately learns how to delegate efficiently past a certain point. Like you just can't grow anymore if you don't. So part of me was kind of like, well, is it even worth me learning to code? Even though I can tell, like I had for whatever, whatever gene it is, like that makes you interested in it. Like I knew I had that, but I was kind of like, do I want to go down that route? Can I keep just using these no code, low code tools and hiring devs? And for my first businesses, I would hire a lot of devs. But I always hated, like I would have, especially with freelancers, you'd have a dev build something and it might be working for 6 months and then stop working. And then you go to find them and they're not working anymore on Upwork or whatever.
Yeah.
And you have no idea. Like I would need to make the smallest little change on the site, like just update an API key, but I wouldn't even know how to do it, and that drove me nuts. Eventually I finally just dove into it. And it kind of accidentally happened. Like the first thing I did was really just to scale up no code stuff. No code services charge you by the task. So as opposed to like compute power, like a cloud platform,
Right.
Which is fine. It makes sense. It's probably hard for them to, figure out compute. I think that might become a thing down the line, but it's just by the task. So it can get a little expensive if you're doing thousands of things a day. And I've certainly, that's one big thing we look at when we're advising on whether to go custom or no code. And I had this one task that I was doing that I just wanted to scale up. And I wasn't necessarily like, I want to learn to code, but I realized I could set up a little cloud function with some JavaScript. So I spent like the whole day kind of learning JavaScript. I went on Code Academy, did that, I thought that was pretty cool. Like seeing that running on the cloud and running a million tasks a day. I was just like, man, this is awesome. Kind of the same way when I discovered these no code tools where I was like, wow, I can do anything with these. When I started dabbling in code, I was like, man, you can really do anything here. Like you're not held back by a platform at all. It's fully custom, which obviously has its drawbacks. It takes more time, and potentially, but I just, after that, I was kind of past the event horizon and just kind of kept going, and gradually and almost accidentally, just before I knew it, I was just building applications. And it was really, I didn't do any boot camps or anything. It was like Code Academy and YouTube.
It is when it kicks in and you see it work and then you understand and you start to fix things and you start to really like you then feel comfortable. It's this, you're just like, with these powers, I can become a superhero. You feel incredible because it's like, oh, wow, now I get it. Like copy paste coding is how I started. It's like go on to I got my friend Matt Oswald, he calls it the full stack overflow engineer. I
Yeah.
just go on to Stack Overflow, find someone that fixed my thing, cut, paste, no idea why it works, but it works. But eventually then you start to go, okay, what if I change this parameter? What if I, do it in a different way? And when that stuff starts to kick in, it is like, then, like you said, it's like, now I know I can do stuff without the baseline. I can start from zero. I can start from an idea and I can build it. It's a fantastic feeling.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm still not above copying Stack Overflow code.
There's nothing wrong with that.
I don't think developers I think any dev who says they grow out of that is lying. People joke about that a lot as being a dev is learning how to Google really, really exceptionally. But anyway, yeah, it's, again, I talk to a lot of like no coders as well. And I'm kind of unique that I'm in the middle a little bit. Like a lot of people are just focused in no code because part of the ethos of it is like, you can build without code, and some people like really get almost emotional about it. And we're like,
like no code fundamentalists, right?
Yeah. I mean, as with anything on Twitter, you'll find people who just take stuff way too far and argue. But no, I like am the no code community is great. I've been on a no code podcast where I discussed kind of these same principles of like where it's good to do code, where it's good to do no code. I'm definitely not one of these people where I'm like picking sides we use both every day for clients. Like I'm like this is not just my opinion. I mean, this is the real life version of it. But and I understand some people aren't cut out as much for code, and no code's great for them. But yeah, learning to code, like that was, I just can't think of a more powerful like skill I've ever learned. It's just amazing. You start you just look at everything differently. Like when I look at the little parameters on the end of a URL now with the question mark,
That's
you know,
right.
like I know what that's doing now. And I'm like, oh, this is making a GET request to a server, right? Like you just see, you're kind of like seeing the matrix in a way. So it's really powerful. I mean, you realize like the world runs on software right now, right? I mean, it's just, we're surrounded by software. It's funny how few people can speak that language, right? So yeah, that was definitely a big, again, I understand people who aren't cut out or aren't interested in coding, because you got to be interested too, not just,
Right.
that's probably the more important piece than being, having a knack for it. But I definitely understand people who don't like it. But for people who are kind of dipping their toes like I was, I would definitely recommend, it's unlike anything that I've ever learned really, because you can just, I mean, there's no limit to it,
Yeah, you're only limited by your imagination. It sounds like such a cliche thing to say, but it really, and as you get comfortable with each bit, it allows you to like fast forward to the part that you're stuck on, and then you can practice that and do that. And even like I'm in the same boat. I do a lot of development only out of necessity, but out of necessity, I grew a passion for being able to do it. So someone says like, oh, I've got this thing I want to do. I immediately think of like, just really, let me just whip up an app for it. And you can show it to someone 5 hours later, and it feels, it's a very creative process, even though it's a weird like left brain, right brain mix, I think. And you definitely have both sides where, you can, you're good at both ends, which is actually even tough. Like I know a lot of amazing developers, and they are like, they want nothing to do with public speaking. They want not like
Yeah.
they're very analytical, purely analytical. And so to be able to split the line, it makes you more unique than some people would even realize.
Yeah, I've definitely, having hired and worked with devs, I definitely have seen that there's a difference. This goes back to talking about the hourly rate, the $30 versus 200. There are a lot of great devs I've worked with but like you said, like they just want to code. That's it. And that's fine. Like I have jobs where that's what I need.
Yeah.
But when it comes to like project management, they're kind of like, they're just sitting around kind of maybe waiting for me to do something. And I've worked with on other projects, I've had a more, I've seen that there are devs that cost a lot more, but they like can design a good UI, because that's something I place a high emphasis on is UI. I don't like creating these like crappy templated looking stuff,
Yeah.
apps. And so if you find someone, a dev who's like also good at communicating, can also manage a project, maybe has some design sense, that's yeah, with software, it is more creative and higher, like the architecture, it has more like higher level architecture and creativity tasks than I think a lot of people realize. If you just want code to do some templated thing, well, there's probably a template on GitHub that can do that.
That's right. It's probably already out there.
It's like the last 20%, that's where you're going to make or break. I'm sure we've all used mediocre software and we've all used exceptional software, right? And you notice the difference. Even people who aren't devs, when an app is crappy or slow or it looks bad, right? So I think it's that extra 20 is where so much value lies.
Yeah, and this is I always talk about user experience. I got people at my company. We say like UI and UX. A decent UI and UX is not differentiating. Not having a decent UI and UX is differentiating for your competitors. Like if it isn't intuitive, if it doesn't flow, if it doesn't look and feel good, like if how it looked didn't matter, there would be sushi smoothies. It matters how it looks.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
why is there latte art competitions? It's the same bloody coffee, whether you shake it in the jar, in the cup, or whether you draw a swan kissing a heart on top of a starry moon. But in the end, it's a pretty fantastic thing to see that experience. And there's an overall experience that's a part of that. And when it's using software, it's not the 5 minutes you spend in the software. It's the fact that you love the fact that it only took you 5 minutes to use the software because it was such a good UX.
Yeah. And I probably spend too much time. Like I actually struggle with, I can be a little too much of a perfectionist sometimes. Like you hear all these, you'll see people post all the time where they're like, look at this V1 of Amazon, look at this V1 of eBay. And it looks horrible, right? And they're like, don't get too hung up. And I definitely, that's a big thing about the no code space too, is about getting started early. Like,
yeah,
don't spend $50,000 to test a market, right? Try to string together a little MVP. So there's definitely a lot of merit there. But yeah, so I might even obsess a little too much over UX, but yeah, it is kind of table stakes today. That wasn't always the case. I know I follow Andrew Wilkinson, who, he started MetaLab and he runs Tiny Capital now. And he talks about when he got into designing, he got on with Slack, I think was one of his first clients or something. And he was like, all these flashy, kind of bubbly UIs and stuff that we have now or the flat UI, whatever you want to call it, that look that every SaaS app has right now. He's like,
right.
He's like, that was pretty novel at one point. People didn't think about UX as a separate thing. It was just write the code to do the thing and kind of make it look good if you can. But so UI and UX has become a lot bigger deal these days, I think.
And it evolves too. And that's the other thing is remember the days of the skeuomorphic icons on the iPhone, and it was a whole big thing. And I forget what was the fellow who was the designer at the time. And everybody was just like, this is it. He's the visionary of the ultimate user experience. And then when he left and they changed to the new sort of the flattened icons, they're like, skeuomorphic is from the 90s. And people are just trashed on skeuomorphic as a method for 2 years. And look, it was a point in time and a place. But I'm with you on this. When do you know it's the M and the V of the MVP? That's a weird judgment call to have to make.
Yeah, that's a huge question that I'm not always great at, admittedly. I'm trying to 80-20 things, I've used the 80-20 analogy 50 times during this interview, but
it works. There's a reason, right?
No, I know.
Principle does stick.
Yeah, it really is. It is. That is something I try to be mindful of. And I actually talk about turning down bad fit work. I actually, on the application side of things, there are a lot of low code agencies that focus really on bare minimum MVP, get it out the door in 2 to 3 weeks. And where they're not doing bad UX, but UX isn't really, you're just punting that. You're not worried about it yet. You're just trying to test a market. Yeah. And I actually don't really try to compete with those guys because I know I would spend too much time obsessing over the UX side of things so I just kind of realized well, we're going to try to on the application side, I try to take projects that are more, I call them V1.5s. So we try to build really lean and we use serverless computing, which we can talk more about that if you want, but I'm all about using the new tools. Even if you're using custom code, still having that no code mindset of building really lean, don't write more code than you need to. When I'm working with my devs, I try to instill that on them. Some of my devs are more old fashioned and they want to build this monolithic app. And I always have to, that's another good thing about learning to code, by the way, even if you're still going to delegate, it helps you to work with developers a lot. Because you can just tell them, and that's one of maybe the biggest things for running a studio for sure. What is that piece of things? Because, and I know I cut off my first thought mid-sentence there, but yeah, it is nice for me to be able to, rather than say, every dev always has their the example of the client who knows nothing about dev who comes to them and says oh, can you just throw AI in right there? The client. and you like are like, dude, you don't understand how hard that it. So every dev I think can relate to that. So I think it helps when when I come to one of my devs and say, hey, we need to like trim this down, or we need to refactor. So like, no, we need all this code. And I can actually like push back a little bit and say, like, no, you look, like, I know for a fact we can use this, method, like we can use this serverless platform and we don't have to do all this. And not to say I'm always the right one. Sometimes we're kind of just going back and forth. That's really useful too, where we can kind of like bounce ideas off each other. So.
Yeah, well, and it is super important. People don't realize that too. It's like, if you're going to go to Spain, as an example, and you pick up a book on, minimal Spanish, it's not because you want to learn Spanish. It's because you want to have a good time in Spain. And it means that being able to speak enough of the language that you can be comfortable to communicate there. And this is the same thing as you work in development tools. I was an ops person, and that's why I started doing development, because I've got to help developers get their code to production. So how can I do that if I don't understand what they do? And as a result, it made me much more empathetic, I guess, and sort of intuitive to what they were trying to achieve. And like you said, you could say like, hey, I see what you're doing here. Is maybe there's a way we could actually use this other thing, or it means you can have a real intellectual back and forth and then get to the right answer. It's like, I'm not about being right. I'm about getting to the right answer.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, it works both ways. It's nice to be able to, I don't try to just tell them to blindly follow me, but I also don't have to blindly trust them either.
Yeah.
They like, I have caught, again, some of my like, I love most of the devs I work with, but I have caught some of them. I can tell, because I've made the same mistake myself. Like, I can tell they're going down a rabbit hole where they're like refactoring some part of the app that just like doesn't need to be refactored. They're like, let's change the API from REST to GraphQL, and I kind of like, look, we don't like need to do that. It's working. We can just do this if you're trying to change this one thing. So it definitely does help to keep, because I'm not just building software for the sake of building it. We have clients and stuff. So you do keeping the project on task is part of it. I don't think that's a fun part. I mean, I think writing code is the fun part, but you do have to be mindful of that. But I think it creates a good respect too, where, again, maybe I'm like delusional, but I think most of my devs enjoy, work. Most of the people I've worked with projects on, I think they kind of enjoy the back and forth, and hopefully don't think I'm an idiot who doesn't know what I'm talking about, right? So I think it helps there, where you guys have a good relationship. And oftentimes I'm in there, if they're not very design focused, let's say, like I have a lot of devs who admittedly they're like, I'm not good with design, don't make me design. And I'm like, that's fine. I'll hop in there, scaffold out the UI, kind of architect some of the code, and you could just fill in the logic. So it's really, again, I'll use 80-20 one more time. A lot of times it is that, like, where the dev's doing 80% maybe in terms of like volume of code, and I'm taking that last 20, but we're both kind of, bouncing off each other and kind of focusing on where we each have our strengths.
And that's the thing, like so that particular person could probably ground up code an AI based platform to be able to tie in, a web front end, talking to Twilio, sending out messages, merging them with Apache logs to make sure like if like they could do all this fantastic stuff, but then you tell them to put a really nice front end on it, and they're going to sit there for 5 straight days trying to figure out a front end, and this is again, let the person do the thing they do best to make the overall platform the best. And this is, again, I'll refer it back to what you and the team are doing. Like, I don't want to be good at this stuff as a business owner. I want to be good at my business. This is why I hired guns, that I know that I believe in the outcome that they're going to get, and I believe in the way they're going to get to the outcome as a partner. And again, respect to you and the team with your approach in doing it that way.
Yeah, and you mentioned Apache there. Like, I specifically hate DevOps. I'm just so completely anti DevOps, because and right now, so that like I really leverage serverless. We use Firebase all the time, but there's AWS. There's a lot of different ones now. But yeah, I just hate anything that's not like building the product, and like, does this enhance the product, or are we spending 8 hours like setting up an SSL on a server? I just hate, that was like the last straw for me when I decided like I'm only going server. We still do server stuff, but and this isn't common anymore, but we had this snafu where we spent the whole day trying to get like SSL on an.
Yeah, right.
And I remember thinking, I was like, dude, I just want an S after the HTTP. Like, that's it. I don't care how it gets done. Like, why is this not an automatic thing? It just, stuff like that drives me crazy. Yeah. And I try to, being opinionated about that helps me with like job posts and stuff, because I can attract more like-minded devs.
Right.
I use some like newer frameworks like Svelte and Firebase and Tailwind, which are a little more like hip and kind of new. They're not as proven, but what I like is if I put out a job post for those exact things, I've learned if I put out a job post for front-end dev, I'm gonna get a million results. Like a lot of people who are like, know this, but not that. But if now I like to be really specific, like I'm looking for a Svelte Firebase dev, and I know no one's gonna apply to that job who's not like
so good. Yeah.
curious about, like, if you're experienced with Svelte, it means like you're curious, because it's so new that there's not a lot of jobs. Like you wouldn't learn it to get a job. But so it helps me weed out people who are just like, I just want to write React code for the rest of my life. I don't care about learning anything new. Not to bash React's great, by the way. And so is Vue. Like I'm not, definitely not picking on them. And React goes really well with serverless, by the way, too. I mentioned serverless, like with Next and Vercel and all that stuff. And Vue and Svelte are both following in that footstep. But yeah, I try, long story short, like, I like trying to attract like people who are like-minded to that, because I hate DevOps. I hate wasting time on stuff that doesn't improve the product.
Yeah, and this is, again, it has its own function and its own role in certain areas, but it's like you know what you're after, and that's the best thing you can be. I mean, as an example, like I said, the only framework I've really learned much in, because I was comfortable with it, was I started doing Ruby on Rails. I used to do like C# stuff and VB, like mostly VB script, and then I got into VB.NET just because I was in a Microsoft shop and I was an ops admin, so I'm doing mostly scripting, not developing. And then I did the Ruby on Rails because we hired a Ruby on Rails developer. And I was like, I got to learn how this thing works. And I was like, this is strangely easy. And then it was kind of funny over time that I just like it. It does exactly what I need it to do. And then when somebody says like, oh, I hear it doesn't scale, or like, I don't think it's very popular. I'm like, where do you store your code? They're like, on GitHub. I'm like, it's written in Ruby on Rails. I hate to tell you. Like, it's like, not that it's right or wrong, but if I'm going to hire a developer, I'm going to do what you do. And I'm going to say, I've got an opinionated outcome. This is what I want. And it narrows the field immediately, which is good. Opinion is good in that way. But you don't want to put that opinion on Twitter sometimes.
Right. Yeah, it's a fine line. But yeah, I think there are gains to being opinionated. You mentioned the scale thing too. This helped me, like, I think one of the advantages to me kind of coming into code more recently, and also coming from the no code side, is I didn't have any of that 10, 15 year dev like baggage or anything, where
Right.
like I'm sure a lot of old school devs will look at this no code stuff and be like, what are you doing? Like, this is a toy. And again, people on Twitter, if you go there, you'll see people arguing both ways. So I was more willing to, and I wasn't trying to get a corporate job or anything. So I was really willing to bet on some newer tools and like serverless and stuff. And I had that no code mindset that you don't need, like, you can kind of scale stuff. I think no code isn't quite as scalable right now, but that could change. But I definitely saw there was a lot of different ways to write software and get stuff done. And you don't necessarily need a server. I think when a couple of years ago, again, I haven't been around like that long or anything, but when I was starting to really look at serverless and be like, should we start going a little heavier on this? Some older school devs would be like, no, you need a server. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And you need an API layer. Like you can't just call cloud functions. But as time goes on, like you start to see, I mean, serverless is clearly taken off, and some of the front end frameworks, like you mentioned Ruby. So, React and Vue and Svelte, the three front end frameworks right now, they all have their own kind of opinionated app libraries as well. That it's not quite as opinionated as Ruby.
Right.
Ruby's really opinionated, and DHH, the founder, he's very opinionated as well. On
That he is. That he is.
Got a lot of opinions all around there. But they have their own app frameworks like Next and Nuxt, and Svelte just released Svelte Kit in beta, which is really exciting. So you're seeing some of that where there's a lot of opinionation on the front end, but also the back end there. You're seeing more boilerplate abstracted, right? Like I get an SSL whenever I push to Firebase now. I don't like ever have to set up an SSL, stuff like that. So
Yeah.
I like the direction that's going. I definitely want to latch onto that.
In the end, I'll say it's be good at the thing that matters to you. And this is why, hire where it makes sense, focus on what matters so that you can affect the outcome on. And, as a business owner, as a developer, that was it. Like I had the same thing. I'm like, do I want to stand up my own front end systems and then deal with payment systems? And like, nope. Shopify sounds pretty good to me.
Oh
It
yeah.
took me about 9 minutes to get my account, and there we go. Like it's so weird. Like you said, when it's new, there's an immediate reaction to like, this is sort of a fad. And like, yeah, like distributed computing, cloud computing, stuff like that. That was a fad. I remember when that was a fad. It stuck. This stuff is going to stick too. So
Yeah, Shopify definitely stuck.
no doubt, no doubt. Yeah, like this little wee company from Ottawa, a little Canadian company, I guess. I don't know if they're based in Ottawa, but I know they have a lot of folks up there. And yeah, it's
Yeah, I've been following them for a while. I remember I tried this little e-commerce store a while ago, and just as like a side project. And I remember, I don't know, they might have been a few billion at the time. They weren't like brand new, but they were a lot smaller than they are now. And yeah, it's crazy how much they've blown up. And yeah, you could call them a no code, low code platform too.
yeah. No, it's fantastic. Hey, well, Mike, thanks very much. We've covered a lot of. So I hope it makes people think, and if anything, too, you may have opened up a few more Integramat customers because it was neat, and I'm new to it altogether. So thank you for sharing that. This is why I love having these conversations, because next thing I find myself neck deep in some really wicked good Integramat stuff, and it may be a real win. So I thank you for taking the time and sharing your knowledge.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks
And
for
for
having me
folks that want to reach out to you too as well, Mike, what's the best way if they want to get connected?
So buildlab.co, .com is our site. My site's mwilliams.co. Yeah, those are the two places to reach out to me. I'm on Twitter at Mike Though, THOUGH after Mike. I don't post a lot of content, but my DMs are there if anyone wants to reach out or is interested or just has questions. We could have talked about this stuff, I think, a lot longer. It's something I'm really interested in. And so that I'm always open to, chat with people about that.
Yeah, I know. That's the sad part is I'm like, oh, I hate to stop sometimes. This is why I got to go like the Rogan level of three. I got to go 3 hours one day because it is so much more fun. You can really open up into some neat areas. But we really did share a lot of great stuff today. So I appreciate it.
Yep. Yeah. And I should just say there's a lot of nuance here. If I came off like I was, too biased towards serverless or code or no code, there's tons of nuance there. Like we didn't have time to disclaim everything, but just want to say that like, I'm just interested in like the best tool for the job. And, I'm definitely, again, didn't quite have time to fit all those nuances in, but
yeah, no, it's all good. Opinions expressed for those of the participants, not necessarily those of the.
Yeah, I feel like I offended maybe some older school developers who still have like server, like I still do server stuff,
That's all right. They don't listen. No, I'm just kidding. No, it is, but it's funny. Like Sometimes you kind of you have to start and spark these conversations, and it is good, and you actually did a fantastic job of making sure you didn't step over a line on anything, for sure, Mike. I appreciate you saying it as we close up too, though. It is good, folks, for folks to understand when you say this stuff. We're not saying this is the only way. We're saying this is a way that we know can work in a particular function. And if anything, like I said, we have to have opinion, because sometimes that's the way you move the needle. That's the way you make the next thing happen. That's the way you get to the 20, instead of just swimming in the 80 all the time and then redoing the 80, because that's what most people end up doing. They don't just do 80, 20. They do
refactor 80 4 different times.
Yeah. So I like it. Awesome, Mike. Thanks very much.
But yeah. Thanks, man.